Britain as top nation had a quite different relationship with the rest of the world compared with the relationship between the United States and the rest of the world today. In economic terms, it is a striking fact that exports, that trade with the rest of the world, played a vastly bigger role in the British economy in 1900 than it plays even today in the US economy. 25% of gross national product was roughly what exports accounted for Britain before the First World War. Compare that with a figure of around 7% or so in recent years in the US. And even more importantly, Britain was a great capital exporter, the world's banker, lending, investing abroad on a colossal scale. Yet today's global hegemon, the United States, is a great borrower, the world's great debtor. If you look at net foreign investment as a proportion of gross domestic product, for Britain before the First World War, it was a positive 9%, a colossal level of capital export. But the United States in the last 10 or so years has shifted into being the greatest debtor. The same figure, the equivalent figure for net foreign investment as a proportion of gross domestic product, is minus 15% for the US today. So the global hegemon today is not a great lender, not a great investor, but a great borrower, borrowing from abroad to finance the greatest consumption boom in all of history. And a third important economic difference. Once upon a time, the global hegemon exported people. A colossal level of migration out of the British Isles lay behind that transformation of the world economy that occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries. Even on the eve of the First World War, between 6 and 8 per thousand of the British population emigrated each year. Of course, I don't need to tell you that the United States is a mirror image of Britain before the First World War. Today, the United States is an importer of people as well as of cash. Now, in discussions of globalization, that is usually where the story stops. Trade, finance, migration. But I want to emphasize the importance of exporting and globalizing institutions. This was something about which the British were never at all embarrassed. And yet it seems to me, and perhaps this follows logically from what I've said about the different economic roles played by Britain and America, the export of American institutions is happening, if it's happening at all, in a far more informal way than the export of British institutions in the 18th and 19th centuries. The Pax Britannica was based on the formal direct rule of about a quarter of the world's population and a quarter of the world's land surface area. I was trying to devise a way of comparing British formal power with American informal power today, and I was trying to find a map that I could compare with those wonderful maps that all British classrooms used to have of the world coloured pink. No such maps appear to exist with, as it were, a tiny little pink bases to characterize America's formal empire. So eventually I found out that there are approximately 70 military bases overseas which the US Armed Forces presently maintain. In fact, nearly half of them are in Western Europe, and the overwhelming majority are in Germany. And indeed, a Martian looking at this imaginary map of American formal rule would conclude that the principal objective of American foreign policy in the year 2001 is to control Germany, clearly the most potent threat to US interests today. This is a tremendously anachronistic distribution of resources that have been dwindling rapidly since the mid-1980s. One of the most striking statistics that the Cash Nexus has to offer is that there was, between the mid-80s and the late 90s, in real terms, a decline in American military expenditure of the order of a third. At a time when the need to drastically reorientate American foreign policy probably logically demanded higher rather than lower expenditure. We are in the midst of an enormous period of restructuring. But this restructuring, it seems to me, in American foreign and defense policy is being done on the cheap. The question I found myself addressing when I posed the Tolstoyan question, what is power, came back to Paul Kennedy's theory of the late 1980s, that the United States ran the risk of imperial overstretch. He drew an explicit parallel with Britain in the 1890s, the weary Titan. And yet it seems to me, as it did then, to be a mistake to imagine that the sources of British decline lay in excessive imperial or military commitments. And rather, what I argue in the book is that if we want to explain what went wrong with British power in the 20th century, the better answer is that the problem lay in understretch, in the failure of British liberal and conservative politicians alike adequately to prepare for the great threat to British global power that was being prepared in Germany from the 1890s, if not before. Understretch laid the British Empire open to an assault through the back door, through Belgium, towards the Channel, which it was wholly ill-equipped to repulse, and the costs of which, in the course of the First World War, rendered the British Empire from that moment on a profoundly financially vulnerable institution. Understretch, in other words, is the danger that great powers face, not overstretch,